Nan Cheng, the head of the Fu family, is sound asleep when Su Qi sneaks into his room. She pauses, staring at him, thinking about how this man has been her husband for 2 years. Gathering her nerve, she straddles him and starts unbuttoning his shirt. The movement wakes him, and he immediately pulls her close, asking who she is. Calmly, she tells him she's his wife and kisses him. When the kiss ends, he takes control and things escalate quickly. The next morning, Nan Cheng wakes up alone. The only trace of what happened the night before is a red stain on the sheets. Anger flares in him as he realizes that the mystery woman disappeared without an explanation. While he's getting dressed, his assistant bursts into the room with news. They've identified the woman. To his shock, it's Su Xue, the daughter of the Su family and the woman his grandmother had arranged for him to marry 2 years ago. Without wasting time, he decides to return to the manor. At the manor, Su Xue is interrogating Su Xue, her maid, asking what it felt like to be with her husband. Her eyes fixate on the hickey on Su Xie's neck, jealousy boiling inside her, thinking that the hickeys should have been hers, and curses the fact that she isn't a virgin. Su Xie, clearly fed up, demands that Su Xue release her grandmother as promised now that she's completed the task. But Su Xue isn't done manipulating her. She threatens Su Xie, warning her to keep quiet about the night or her grandmother's life is over. With Nan Cheng now the head of the Fu family, Su Xue declares Su Qi's role as a substitute is over. She's ready to claim her place as Mrs. Fu. 2 years ago, Su Xue had assumed Nan Cheng was just an illegitimate son and forced Su Qi to marry him in her place. But now that he's risen to power, she wants what she thinks is hers. Su Xue wipes the scar on Su Qi's face, sneering at her appearance, thinking how ugly she is. Just as she's relishing her superiority, a maid rushes into the room, announcing that the young master has returned. Nan Cheng steps into the room and Su Xue rushes toward him, playfully telling him that he was rough the previous night in the hotel room. He grabs her wrist firmly, his sharp gaze cutting through her facade, and demands to know how she dares to take advantage of him. Fear flickers in her eyes as she stammers out an explanation, claiming it was his grandmother's doing. She had urged them to consummate the marriage and even drugged her. Su Xue insists she's just as much a victim in all this. Meanwhile, Su Qi watches the tense exchange, her mind racing. She knows all too well that Nan Cheng, as the ruthless and unyielding head of the Fu family, doesn't tolerate deceit or manipulation. If he discovers she was the one in his hotel room, there's no telling what he might do. Panic sets in, and she decides to slip away quietly. But just as she turns to leave, Nan Cheng's cold voice cuts through the room, ordering her to stop. Her heart pounds as she freezes in place and slowly turns around to face him. The moment his eyes land on her face, recognition flashes across his features. She's the woman from the hotel room. As Nan Cheng's eyes linger on Su Qi, she feels like the hickeys on her neck are burning. Before she can react, Su Xue steps in front of him, confidently claiming he's mistaken. Su Qi isn't who he thinks she is. She's just a new maid, Su Xue says. Nan Cheng repeats the word maid as his gaze sharpens on Su Qi, who quickly plays along. She insists she doesn't know him and repeats that she's just the maid. He asks why she was running, and Su Qi, thinking fast, tells him she wasn't running. She was just heading to the kitchen. Her calm act seems to work. Nan Cheng begins to doubt himself, deciding he must have been mistaken. Convinced the person from the hotel room was Su Xue, not the maid, he lets Su Qi go and heads upstairs. Once he's out of sight, Su Xue corners Su Qi in the kitchen and warns her to stay away from Nan Cheng. Su Qi stays calm, reminding Su Xue that she can leave anytime, but only if Su Xue fulfills her promise and lets her grandmother go. Su Xue snaps, yelling that Su Qi's mission isn't over yet, especially now that Su Qi has just told Nan Cheng she's the maid. If Su Qi suddenly disappears, it'll look suspicious. For now, Su Xue declares, Su Qi will remain a maid. Su Qi, unfazed, tells Su Qi to focus her energy on securing her position as Mrs. Fu instead of wasting time on petty threats. Her remark strikes a nerve, and Su Qi's anger flares. She stares at Su Qi's striking blue eyes, bitterly marveling at how someone so ugly could have such beautiful eyes. She also wonders why Su Qi's face bears an uncanny resemblance to the one she had paid a fortune to achieve. She recalls her plastic surgeon mentioning that the face was modeled after a stunningly beautiful woman he'd encountered in the imperial city. She calls Su Xue an ugly woman and tells her to mind her business. Before leaving, Su Xue commands the head maid to assign Su Xie the smallest, dingiest room and load her with the dirtiest, most grueling tasks. In her small, dimly lit room, Su Qi stares at her reflection in the mirror. She knows staying in the Fu Manor means facing Nan Cheng again, but she has no choice. Her grandmother's life depends on her. At least, she thinks with some relief that Nan Cheng doesn't know what she really looks like. Su Qi reflects on her past. She is the biological daughter of the Su family, but a mix-up at birth led her to grow up in the countryside, far from her real parents. When the Su family eventually found her, they didn't accept her. The scar on her face and her rural upbringing made her unworthy in their eyes. So they shoved her into an old, forgotten room and treated her as if she were a stranger. Su Xue, the family's pampered second daughter, delighted in bullying her, making Su Xi's life unbearable. When Su Xi finally grew old enough to leave, she thought she could escape her miserable existence. But just as she was about to step away from the Su family forever, the marriage arrangement between the Su and Fu families came up. At the time, Fu Nan Cheng was still considered an illegitimate son, and Su Xue refused to marry him. To escape the union, Su Xue kidnapped Su Xi's grandmother and forced her to take her place. Now, Su Xi vows to save her grandmother, no matter what it takes. The next morning, Nan Cheng lies in bed, a faint but familiar scent lingering in the sheets. It's the same scent that clung to the woman he spent the night with, the one who finally gave him a peaceful sleep after years of insomnia. He wonders if he slept well because of her scent and decides to find out. Heading downstairs, he spots Su Qi hard at work. Without hesitation, he walks up behind her and wraps his arms around her, startling her. He calls her Su Xue and asks why she smells so good, and asks her what perfume she uses. Su Qi quickly shakes her head and tells Nan Cheng she isn't the madam. In her haste to push him away, her finger catches on a thorn from the roses she's arranging. Nan Cheng thinks that this is the second time he's mistaken her for his wife. She pushes him away, saying that the madam is nearby. Nan Cheng watches her with narrowed eyes, wondering why she always looks so frightened around him. He asks where she's hurt. She looks into his eyes, cheeks pink, tells him that she is fine and thanks him for his concern. Just then, Su Xie arrives, her voice sharp and furious as she yells Su Qi's name, and then she sends Su Qi to the kitchen. Then immediately turns to Nan Cheng with a bright smile, suggesting they have breakfast together. In the kitchen, Su Qi's chest heaves as she thinks back to how Nan Cheng nearly recognized her and silently prays to stay under the radar. All she wants is to rescue her grandmother without causing any unnecessary trouble. The headmaid snaps her out of her thoughts, ordering her to serve the milk at breakfast. Su Qi obeys, carefully bringing the tray to the dining room. As she approaches, she overhears Su Xue talking to Nan Cheng, who is casually reading the newspaper. Su Xue casually mocks Su Qi, saying Su Qi grew up in the countryside and everyone shuns her because of her ugly face, but she is kind-hearted enough to keep Su Qi as a maid. Su Qi looks at Nan Cheng, thinking that he doesn't seem to care about mistaking her for Su Xue, which is very fortunate. Later that afternoon, Su Qi stands outside her university, trying to find a taxi to take her back to the manor. Just as she grows frustrated, a sleek private car pulls up in front of her. The window rolls down, revealing Fu Yu, her classmate, known for being the university's heartthrob, and a notorious bully. With a teasing grin, Fu Yu leans out and calls her ugly girl, laughing as he asks if she's struggling to find a cab. Before she can respond, he offers her a ride, which she accepts. Su Qi seats awkwardly beside Yu. He casually introduces her to his uncle, who's driving. Her heart nearly stops when she looks up and realizes the man behind the wheel is none other than Nan Cheng. Completely oblivious, Yu starts talking about her. He cheerfully tells Nan Cheng that Su Qi is his classmate and claims she's always had a crush on him. Before she can protest, he pulls out a piece of paper and announces that Su Qi wrote him a love letter today. However, Su Qi has no idea what he's talking about. but it's clear someone in their class must have written it as a prank. Yu begins to read the letter aloud, much to her embarrassment. He dramatically recites the part where she begs him to let her be his girlfriend. Su Xue steals a glance at Nan Cheng in the rearview mirror, only to find his sharp eyes locked on hers. The way he looks at her reminds her of the night they spent with him, which makes her blush. Yu pulls Susie closer, grinning as he teases her. "I didn't know you liked me so much, ugly girl," he says. In her head, she's screaming at him to shut up. Then, to her utter disbelief, Yu declares that she's now his girlfriend. Nan Cheng immediately slams on the brakes, bringing the car to a sudden stop. His voice is cold and firm as he orders Yu to get out of the car. Yu looks at him in confusion, protesting that he hasn't reached his destination yet. Nan Cheng's expression darkens as he asks, "Is your leg broken?" The icy tone leaves no room for argument. Yu reluctantly gets out, but not before turning to Su Xue. The rest of the drive is painfully silent. Su Xue sits stiffly, afraid to even glance at Nan Cheng. When they finally arrive, he yanks her out of the car, his grip firm but not painful. Turning her to face him, he leans in, his tone low and commanding. "Stay away from my nephew," he warns, his eyes narrowing. Without waiting for a response, he lets her go and strides off, leaving Su Xue standing there, flustered and overwhelmed. Later that night, Nan Cheng lies awake in his bedroom, restless. The familiar scent that lulled him to sleep the other night is missing, leaving him frustrated. Picking up the phone, he calls downstairs and demands that his wife come to him immediately. When the message reaches Su Xue, she's overjoyed. Smirking, she heads straight to Su Xue, bragging that her husband is calling for her. She smugly declares that she'll be spending the night in Nan Cheng's bed, flaunting her role as Mrs. Fu. Su Xue congratulates her with a calm, indifferent tone, which only irritates Su Xue further. Before heading upstairs, Su Xue demands Su Xi's help preparing her bath. As Su Xie assists, Su Xue sprays an overwhelming amount of perfume, turning to Su Xie with a satisfied grin. She taunts her, asking if she's jealous and reminding her that she's just a stand-in. "I'm the real Mrs. Fu," Su Xue adds with a laugh, confident in her position. When Su Xue arrives in Nan Cheng's room, she's eager to charm him. But the moment she steps closer, Nan Cheng's expression shifts. He immediately notices that her scent is different from the one lingering on the bed, the one he can't forget. His annoyance grows, and Su Xue's heart skips a beat as she realizes his mind might be elsewhere. Nan Cheng narrows his eyes and asks her directly if she's been avoiding their bed. Panicked, Su Xue lies, claiming she's been there every night. She explains that the change in scent is because she just had a luxurious flower petal bath. His patience wears thin, and he orders her to go shower again, warning her to return with her original scent, or she'll lose her place as Mrs. Fu. Frightened by his tone, Su Xue quickly leaves, her mind racing. She starts to suspect that someone else has been in his bed and realizes there's only one possibility: Su Xie. Storming to Su Qi's small room, Su Xue finds her fresh out of the shower. Su Xie glances at her with a frown, immediately sensing trouble. She asks why Su Xue is there and if Nan Cheng kicked her out. Su Xue brushes off the question and smugly insists that Su Qi must go to Nan Cheng's bed in her place. Su Qi refuses outright, but Su Xue has anticipated this. She pulls out her phone and shows Su Qi a heartbreaking video of her grandmother in the hospital, weakly calling out for her. The sight shatters Su Qi's resolve, and she reluctantly agrees. Before Su Qi leaves, Su Xue grabs her arm and warns her sternly. She must not let Nan Cheng touch her. She's forbidden from being intimate with him, and she needs to leave his bed by 6 in the morning. Su Qi nods silently, her heart heavy as she prepares for another tense night. As Su Xue walks away, she reminds Su Qi to cover her scar so she doesn't scare her husband. Su Qi heads to her room, carefully wiping off the makeup that hides her scar. Without the makeup, she feels a little more comfortable, but she knows she has to be cautious. She can't afford to be discovered, especially not when her grandmother's safety is on the line. She also makes a mental note to find a chance to figure out where her grandmother is. Meanwhile, Nan Cheng is lying in his bed, feeling irritable and confused. He can't stop thinking about the maid, Su Xue, and the supposed love letter she wrote to his nephew. It doesn't sit right with him. When Su Xue enters the room, she lies down at the far end of the bed, careful to keep some distance. Nan Cheng notices and asks why she's so far away, ordering her to come closer. He pulls her toward him, and as he does, he inhales her scent, asking her what perfume she wears. Su Xue hesitates, telling him she doesn't wear any perfume. Nan Cheng looks at her curiously and asks if it's her natural scent. As he plays with her hair, Su Xue feels even more nervous. She quickly tries to clarify, saying that's not what she meant, and accidentally calls him master, as she would in her maid role. She immediately regrets it, realizing she's supposed to be pretending to be his wife, not his servant. Nan Cheng repeats what she said, asking if only the maid calls him that. Flustered, she stammers, explaining that she's just nervous since it's her first time spending the night with him. He reminds her that she was bold when she first came to his hotel room, making her feel even more exposed. Nan Cheng leans in slightly, his voice teasing as he asks her to call him what she normally calls him. Su Xue blushes deeply and, barely above a whisper, says, "Hubby," as she lies there, wondering how he'd react if he knew she wasn't his wife, but just the maid. She bids him goodnight when he suggests they sleep. The following morning, Su Xue wakes up at exactly 6 a.m., her heart racing as she remembers how much trouble she'll be in with Su Xue. Nan Cheng, still half asleep, asks her why she's awake, telling her to stay and sleep a little longer. Su Xue hurriedly gets out of bed, telling him she needs to go, while he wonders why she's in such a rush and can't stay for just a bit longer. Once in her room, Su Xue quickly gets into her maid's uniform. It's not long before Su Hui shows up at her door, asking why she spent an extra 5 minutes with her husband and whether his hug was too warm for her to let go of. Su Xue, trying to keep her cool, tells her not to question her about being with her husband, especially since she doesn't trust her. She silently curses the fact that she barely had enough time to finish her makeup. Then, Su Xue demands to know what perfume Su Xie is wearing. She insists that Su Xie hand it over. Su Xie hesitates before showing her the bottle. She wonders why both Nan Cheng and Su Hui have asked about her perfume. The bottle is called Double C, a limited edition, but the problem is it's almost empty. Su Xie knows she can't afford to be without it, not when she's stuck pretending to be someone else. She realizes she won't be able to stay around either Nan Cheng or Su Xue until she gets a replacement. Seeing the empty bottle, Su Xue snaps, raising her hand as if to hit Su Xie, yelling that the perfume is wasted on her. In a swift motion, Su Xie catches her hand, her grip firm as she calmly responds that Su Xue should go buy a new bottle since the perfume won't be wasted on her. Su Xue has been begging her mother for that luxury perfume for so long and still hasn't been able to get her hands on it. Seeing the bottle in Su Xie's hands, she immediately assumes that Su Xie, coming from the countryside, must have stolen it. When she notices Nan Cheng approaching from the corner of her eye, she suddenly collapses onto the floor, accusing Su Xie of pushing her. Nan Cheng immediately yells at Su Xie, demanding that she apologize to Su Hui. Su Xie, confused and frustrated, insists that she didn't push Su Hui and that she's just faking it. But Su Hui continues with her accusation, and Nan Cheng, still giving her a chance, demands that Su Xie apologize. Su Xie, feeling betrayed by Nan Cheng and disillusioned by his lack of judgment, decides to give in. She can't believe she ever had high hopes for him, especially when she's just a stand-in for Su Hui, someone he barely knows. With a quick push, she finally says, "I'm sorry for pushing you this time," before walking away. Su Hui, now more determined, grabs Nan Cheng's hand, telling him that he must do something about the maid. Nan Cheng yanks his hand away, his voice cold as he tells her not to perform such silly tricks in front of him again. Su Hui quickly realizes that Nan Cheng saw what really happened and wonders why he defended Su Xie. However, she doesn't dwell on it too long, as he casually explains that he only helped her because he was pleased with her performance the previous night. He tells her to come to his room tonight. As Nan Cheng walks away, Su Hui seethes with jealousy, her mind racing. She can't believe that Su Xie managed to steal Nan Cheng's heart after just one night. If anyone finds out about it, her marriage will be ruined, and she can't let that happen. Desperate, she calls her mother, demanding that she get her a bottle of the elusive CC perfume. Su Xue accuses Suzi of using the perfume to seduce Nan Cheng and insists that her mother must act fast. Her mother reassures her that she's already sent someone to buy the perfume. As for Suzi, her parents have already made plans to marry her off, and they've contacted young master's son to help them get the perfume in exchange for Suchi. Later, Suzi receives a call from Lilan, Suyu's mother, and also her biological mother. She wonders if Lilan is calling to question her about what happened that morning. Lilan tells her to come to Yunli Grand Hotel to discuss her grandmother. Suzi senses something fishy and figures she wants to see what the mother-daughter duo are plotting. So, she texts Su Wei, saying she forgot her room card and that Su Wei should bring it to her, or she won't be. When Suzi arrives at the hotel, Nan Cheng, who has just gotten there himself, notices her walking in. He and his assistant quietly follow her, watching as she enters a room. Moments later, a young man walks in after her. Nan Cheng asks his assistant who the man is, and his assistant responds that the man is Sun Quan, known for his particular bed fetishes and the fact that he has 2 dead wives. His assistant suggests they intervene, but Nan Cheng, thinking Suzi went in on her own, tells him to wait. Inside the room, Suzi positions herself so that only the side of her face, the one without the scar, is visible to Sun Quan. He's taken aback by her beauty and assumes she's the gift the Su family sent him. As he reaches for her, she sidesteps, causing him to stumble and exposing her full face. Sun Quan's expression changes instantly when he sees her scar, calling her ugly and angrily demanding to know if she's the one the Su family had offered him. Suzi quickly clears up the confusion, explaining that she's the ugly one and that her sister, who is considered the most beautiful in the city, is actually the one meant for him. Just then, Su Xue bursts into the room, throwing insults at Su Qi. But before she can say much, Sun Quan lunges toward her, trying to kiss her. Su Xi, shocked and trying to fend him off, protests that Su Qi is the one he's supposed to marry. Su Qi snaps at her, questioning whether the Su family really wants to marry her, an ugly girl from the countryside. Off to Sun Quan. She demands to know what she thinks of Sun Quan, making the situation even more tense. Sun Quan, unmoved by Su Xue's protests, pushes her onto the bed, insisting that the Su family wouldn't dare deceive him. Su Xue is in complete shock, struggling to understand why this is happening to her when she believes it should be Su Qi in this position. Screaming for Su Qi to help her, Su Xue's cries are met with Su Qi walking away, nonchalantly declaring that only Su Xue, the #1 beauty in the city, is worthy of Sun Quan. Once outside the room, Suzi's phone buzzes with a message from Fu Yu, saying he's found her, followed by multiple calls. She'd assumed he was joking when he talked about dating her, but now his persistent calls and harassment make her frustrated. She ignores his calls, deciding she can't get tangled up with the uncle and nephew anymore. As she walks, she spots Yu nearby, causing her to panic and dash into the nearest room to hide. In the midst of her hiding, she overhears Yu calling his uncle right outside the door, which makes her realize she might have stumbled into Nan Cheng's room. She catches a glimpse of a figure through the bathroom door's frosted glass, and in a panic, she dives under the duvet to hide. Nan Cheng, fresh from a shower and clad in a robe, steps out of the bathroom, asking Fu Yu why he's shouting. Su Qi, holding her breath, hopes she can remain unnoticed. As Fu Yu continues to talk, Nan Cheng is distracted by the presence of someone under the duvet. He notices Su Qi's pleading expression, her finger pressed to her lips, silently asking him to stay quiet. When Fu Yu asks if Nan Cheng has seen Su Qi, Nan Cheng's mind races. He realizes she is hiding under the blanket and decides to cover for her. When Yu mentions that he is looking for the ugly girl, Nan Cheng quickly grabs the duvet, covering her head completely, and insists he hasn't seen her. Yu, unaware of Suzi's presence, leaves in search of her. Once the door shuts behind him, Nan Cheng angrily pulls the duvet off Su Qi, demanding to know what she is doing. As she rises, her hair becomes tangled in his robe's button, pulling her back down into his lap. Nan Cheng, frustrated, asks if she is doing this on purpose. Suchi quickly tries to untangle her hair, but in her flustered state, her hand brushes against his lower stomach. Nan Cheng snaps, asking where her hand is going. Embarrassed, Suchi immediately removes her hand, apologizing, and asks him to help her untangle her hair instead. Nan Cheng's grip tightens on her face as he glares at her, his anger rising. He accuses her of seducing his nephew and taking things too far, pointing out the sequence of events. Her meeting with Sun Quan, being in his bed now, and playing both sides. Suchi, feeling the heat of his accusations, doesn't flinch. Instead, she boldly holds his hand, the one holding her face, and challenges him with a daring look. She asks him if he's been seduced, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. Nan Cheng's eyes narrow, clearly taken aback by her response. The atmosphere grows even more charged as he tries to process her words. Suchi, standing her ground, isn't intimidated by him. She knows the danger of the situation, but also understands the power of defiance. She tells him that he looks like he's angry and definitely not interested in being seduced by someone like her. He doesn't take kindly to that, gripping her neck and asking if she's trying to get herself killed. As his hand tightens, she starts panicking, wondering how the heck she's going to get out of this alive. In a desperate move, she grabs him by the collar and kisses him. His grip loosens instantly, and she quickly pushes him away. But the kiss, weirdly enough, feels oddly familiar to him. He's thrown off and starts wondering if he's losing his mind. Because the woman from that night was Su Xue. How could he think the maid looks like her? He warns her in no uncertain terms that if she ever dares to step into his bed again, she won't live to see the next morning. Then he adds that he's only into beautiful women, and frankly, she doesn't fit that bill. She just rolls her eyes and walks out, not even caring about his opinion. She heads to the bathroom, washes her face, and the scar's gone with it. She thinks to herself that Nan Cheng can believe whatever he wants, because once her grandmother is safe, she won't have to deal with any of this again. As she steps out of the hotel, she bumps into Fu Yu. He asks if she needs something from him, and with a smirk, tells her they're going on a date. Suchi immediately shuts him down, saying she didn't write the love letter, she's not interested, and she won't be his girlfriend. But before she can finish, Fu Yu notices her face. No scar. Fu Yu grabs her, admiring her beauty, and teasingly asks why she's trying to hide it. Just as things are about to get awkward, Nan Cheng steps out of the hotel, all dressed up. Yu, noticing the moment, excitedly calls him over to check out Susi's face. Panicking, Susi quickly ducks behind Yu, begging him not to tell anyone, especially Nan Cheng, who's coming their way. When Yu presses her for the reason, she says it's complicated but pleads for him to keep quiet. Yu grins, making her a deal. He won't say anything, but only if she agrees to be his girlfriend. Suchi flatly rejects him, telling him she's not interested and he's wasting his time. She tries to walk away but freezes when she sees Nan Cheng getting closer. Yu doesn't let up, though. He offers a compromise. Be his girlfriend for just a month, and if she still doesn't like him by then, he'll stop bothering her. With no other choice, Suchi reluctantly agrees. As Nan Cheng chats with his nephew, Suchi quickly finishes touching up her scar. Nan Cheng notices and asks Yu what happened to her face. And Yu, ever the troublemaker, claims that he just wanted Nan Cheng to see how ugly she's become. Even worse than yesterday. Suchi, now done with her makeup, touches Yu's arm to signal him. And he takes the hint, stepping forward to introduce her. He tells his uncle that his ugly girl has officially agreed to be his girlfriend. Suchi can't help but think how she just escaped Nan Cheng's bed, only to land in a weird situation with his nephew, wondering how she keeps getting herself into these messes. Nan Cheng's assistant interrupts, saying he has a meeting to attend, and Nan Cheng leaves without another word. Yu, still eager, suggests they go see a movie, but Suchi quickly turns him down and walks off, leaving him feeling a bit deflated. She then gets a call from her mom, Lilan, telling her to come home immediately. When Suchi gets back, she finds Su Xue crying hysterically while their mom tries to comfort her. Su Xue accuses Suchi of doing everything on purpose, and Lilan, furious, raises her hand to slap Suchi, calling her malicious. She goes on to say that Suchi tricked Su Hui into going to see Sun Quan and asks if Suchi knows who Sun Quan really is. Suchi grabs her mom's hand and asks if she didn't know who Sun Quan was. Just then, their father, Su Changrong, walks in, his expression dark and grim. Lilan demands to know what Sun Quan had to say, and Changrong explains that Sun Quan had already helped them deliver their bid proposal for the CC perfume deal, and they were just one step away from securing a partnership. But now, since Su Xue has angered him, he refuses to act as their middleman. Su Xue, acting the victim, blames Su Qi for everything. Changrong turns to Su Qi and asks if she realizes how important Sun Quan and CC perfume are to the family. Su Qi, unimpressed, responds that she didn't know before, but now she gets it. Apparently, the family is willing to sell off their daughter just to get that perfume deal. Lilan, growing frustrated, tells Su Qi that she is part of the Su family and that she should contribute to their success. Su Qi throws it back, saying that she's a daughter of the Su family just like Su Xue and Su Qianru, so why aren't her sisters doing their part? Lilan snaps back, saying that Su Xue has connections to Nan Cheng, and Su Qianru has been studying perfumery in France for years. She's always been the family's hope. Su Xue chimes in, claiming that the family is supporting Su Qi to treat her grandmother and that Su Qi should be grateful for having managed to get Sun Quan's attention. Su Qi sarcastically says she wants to contribute, but unfortunately she's just a country bumpkin with an ugly face who can't seem to make a difference. She points out that Sun Quan doesn't like her, so what good would she be? With that, she storms out of the house. Once outside, she quickly texts someone, ordering them to return the Su family's bid proposal. The reply is simple. Yes, boss. Not long after, Chang Rong receives a call informing him that the bid proposal for CC perfume is being returned. Lilan asks Chang Rong what their next move should be, and he turns to Su Hui, asking how things are going with Nan Cheng. He presses her on when their family's relationship will be made public. Su Hui sighs, saying that things aren't going well right now, but once she gets the CC perfume deal, everything will fall into place. Chang Rong slams his hand on the table in frustration, yelling at her for being unable to handle something so simple. He tells her that if she were more competent, they wouldn't be in this position, begging around for help. Lilan pleads with him to give Su Xue more time, and Chang Rong agrees, but with a warning. Su Xue better not mess this up. He reminds her not to forget how her marriage with Nan Cheng came about, and Su Xue promises that she'll make sure Nan Cheng acknowledges their family publicly as soon as possible. 2 years ago, Su Xue had stolen a jade pendant from Su Qi's room. The Fu family had seen the pendant and agreed to a marriage alliance. At the time, Fu Nancheng was still an illegitimate child, so Su Hui had been unwilling to marry him. Now that he's the head of the Fu family, Su Hui is determined to lock down her place as Mrs. Fu before he ever finds out the truth. Later that night, as Su Qi is about to go to bed, Su Hui barges into her room and informs her that she'll be spending the night with Nan Cheng again. Su Qi wonders aloud if Nan Cheng is some child who needs someone with him every night. Su Xue reminds her that Su Qi still has her grandmother's illness to worry about, so Su Qi reluctantly agrees to her sister's demands. As Su Qi walks past Su Xue, she adds a jab, telling her that she'll be spending the night in her husband's comfortable arms for her. Su Xue's face twists in annoyance, but she keeps her cool. Nan Cheng, fresh out of the shower, can't stop thinking about the hotel incident. He's still fuming about Su Qi daring to date his nephew, wondering if she treats Fu Yu the same way she treats him. As he steps into the room, he notices a figure in bed, and for a second, he assumes it's Su Xue sleeping. He lies down beside her, pulling her close. Su Qi, however, is wide awake, watching him closely. She notices he's lost in thought and asks if something's wrong, wondering if someone upset him. Maybe the maid. Su Qi. Nan Cheng immediately tells her not to mention Su Qi's name and admits that he's still bothered by what happened in the hotel. He's clearly agitated and doesn't want to talk about it, but Su Xue suggests they just go to sleep early. Nan Cheng, however, says he doesn't want to sleep. When she asks what he wants to do instead, he teasingly rubs her lips, asking her what she thinks he wants to do. Without wasting another second, he starts kissing her. Su Wei pushes him away, clearly not in the mood. She bites his lip and pushes harder, her mind on Su Qi's strange, complicated hold on Nan Cheng. When he wipes the blood away from his lip and asks what's going on, she coolly explains that it's not about rejecting him. She's just on her period. He rubs her stomach gently, asking if it hurts. And when she says no, he shrugs and says that a period doesn't stop kissing. With that, he leans in again, kissing her without hesitation. The kiss breaks, and Nan Cheng looks at Su Xue with a raised eyebrow, asking if she's never kissed anyone before. He tells her to relax and leans in again, promising that he won't hurt her. After a while, he pulls back, holding her close and suggesting they should just get some sleep. The next morning, as Su Qi goes about her chores, Su Xue asks if Nan Cheng is awake yet. Su Qi casually replies that he's not, and that she told him last night she was on her period. Su Xue flips out, yelling at her for saying that and accusing her of trying to get Nan Cheng's attention. Su Qi, unfazed, hits back, asking Su Xue why she's letting a shameless woman like her sleep next to her husband. This makes Su Xue fume with anger, but she knows she can't win a battle of words with Su Qi, so she decides to play a different game. She tells Su Qi to go to the master bedroom in 10 minutes to pick up Nan Cheng's dirty clothes. Su Qi sees the malicious glint in her eyes and wonders if Su Xue thinks she's blind. Meanwhile, Su Xue heads to Nan Cheng's room, where he's still asleep, and sneaks into his bed. The moment she settles in, Nan Cheng opens his eyes and sharply asks what she's doing. Su Xue, playing coy, says she's just there to sleep with him. Nan Cheng tells her to leave and calls for maid Zhou to change the sheets, firmly stating that Su Xue is not allowed in his bed during the day. Just as Su Xue realizes things aren't going her way, she notices Su Qi walking toward the room and quickly clings to Nan Cheng, pretending he said something funny. Su Qi walks in, and Nan Cheng, irritated, immediately yells at her for entering the room. Su Qi turns away, not wanting to see any more of them. The sight is painful, and she feels her heart ache as she closes the door behind her. Just as she's about to walk away, she overhears Nan Cheng sending Su Xue out of the room and threatening to cut off her hands if she dares to touch him like that again. Later, in the hallway, Su Xue approaches her with a smug look and asks if Su Qi has finally faced reality. She goes on to explain that Nan Cheng is upset because Su Qi interrupted their good time. Su Qi calmly replies that not only did she see what was going on, but she also heard Nan Cheng tell Su Xue to leave. This sets Su Xue off, but her rant is cut short when Fu Yu barges in, calling out to ask if his uncle is awake. Su Xue rushes over to him, confused about why he's there. Fu Yu, clearly distracted, mistakes Su Xue for Su Qi and greets her with his usual teasing nickname, Ugly Girl. He questions why she's in his uncle's house and why she's not covering up the scar on her face. At that moment, Nan Cheng, overhearing the conversation, asks Fu Yu what he's talking about. Su Qi feels the weight of the situation crashing down on her, thinking that everything is about to unravel. Nan Cheng, clearly confused, asks Fu Yu why he mistook Su Xue for someone else. Fu Yu stammers, unsure of how to respond. In an awkward move, he grabs Su Qi and uses her hair to cover the scar on her face, thinking that she looks just like Su Xue. He asks her why she looks exactly like his nephew's fiancée. Su Xue quickly jumps in, explaining that Su Qi had surgery to look like her, and the scar is the result of a failed procedure. Nan Cheng turns to Su Qi, asking if that's true. She hesitates for a moment before confirming it. He then asks if she's been hiding the scar to impersonate Su Xue, but Su Qi simply replies that even though she covers it, the scar can never be fully hidden. Annoyed, Nan Cheng walks away, telling her not to deceive him again or she'll regret it. After a collective sigh of relief from Su Qi, Su Xue, and Fu Yu, Yu turns to Su Qi with a new proposition. He asks why she's working as a maid at his uncle's house and offers to double her salary if she agrees to work as his personal maid. Su Xue scoffs, asking how he could be interested in someone who's had plastic surgery, but Fu Yu just retorts that he thinks Su Xue is the one who's fake. Turning back to Su Qi, Yu insists that she should come with him. Before she can respond, Nan Cheng calls out to Fu Yu, demanding that he follow him to the company. He wants to assess his nephew's progress in finance and management. Fu Yu initially refuses, but Nan Cheng threatens to inform his father and cut off his credit card, which gets Fu Yu to quickly agree. As they leave, Yu promises Su Qi that they'll hang out later. Meanwhile, Su Qi receives a text from an unknown number, and she immediately knows it's from Nan Cheng. The message urges her to break up with Fu Yu immediately. Annoyed, she thinks that Nan Cheng should be telling his nephew that, as she has no intention of wasting time with him. She then turns to Su Xue, demanding to know where her grandmother is. When Su Xue refuses, Su Qi pulls out a picture of her with Sun Quan, leaving Su Xue visibly shocked. Su Xue tries to grab the phone from Su Qi, but Su Qi quickly dodges, holding the photo up as a threat. She warns Su Xue that if she doesn't tell her where her grandmother is, she'll show Nan Cheng the photo and reveal how Su Xue has been cheating on him. Su Xue, realizing she has no other choice, reluctantly gives in and tells Su Qi. Su Qi, satisfied with the answer, tells Su Xue that she's leaving and won't be coming back. Su Xue panics, wondering how she'll manage now. Later that night, in his home office, Nan Cheng asks his secretary if he has received any updates from CC. The secretary replies that while he has contacted them, no response has come through yet. Nan Cheng then orders a cup of coffee. A few minutes later, a maid brings him his coffee, and he asks her where Su Qi is. The maid informs him that Su Qi has resigned. He wonders if she has gone to work for Yu. Meanwhile, Su Qi is with her grandmother, ignoring all calls from Fu Yu, who desperately tries to reach her. She blocks his number without hesitation. When Nan Cheng's call comes through next, she does the same, blocking him too. Nan Cheng's calls to Su Qi continue to go unanswered, and when his secretary informs him that CC is busy and that he needs to make an appointment for the ointment, Nan Cheng grows increasingly frustrated. He tries calling Su Qi again, but when his call still doesn't go through, the secretary hesitantly tells him that she must have blocked him. Enraged, Nan Cheng throws his phone on the table. The secretary, noticing his frustration, realizes that Nan Cheng has been trying to reach Su Qi, leading him to wonder if the ointment is for her. Nan Cheng snaps at the secretary to leave, and he quickly exits, leaving Nan Cheng to stew in his thoughts. Looking out the window, Nan Cheng thinks about Su Qi, convincing himself that it's better for her to be gone and that he can't let her keep affecting him. He leaves his office and asks the maid to summon Su Xue, only to find out that Su Xue has gone home to take care of her mother, who has fallen ill. The next day, Nan Cheng's mood is so dark that it doesn't go unnoticed by his employees. One of them asks the secretary why the boss is so angry, and the secretary mutters that it's because of the maid. After work, Nan Cheng, seeking to distract himself, heads to a place called Yipin Lan, since his wife isn't home. Upon arrival, he overhears his niece, Fu Yingying, talking to someone about staying there, saying that her uncle is nice and wouldn't kick her out. To his surprise, the person turns out to be Su Qi. As she steps out of the room, she bumps into Nan Cheng, and they both freeze, staring at each other in shock. Yingying, noticing them, raises an eyebrow and asks her uncle why he's there, and why he's holding Su Qi's waist. Su Qi quickly whispers for Nan Cheng to let go, which he does. He then demands an explanation from Yingying about what's going on. Yingying explains that Su Qi is there because she invited her to stay, but Nan Cheng doesn't seem convinced. He immediately tells Su Qi to leave. Su Qi, however, is determined to stay. She grabs his hand, pleading with him to let her stay just a little longer. She explains that she has nowhere else to go, having spent all her money on her grandmother's hospital bills. She promises that she will move out as soon as she finds a place. Nan Cheng, distracted by the memory of their kiss in the hotel, pauses for a moment, staring at her lips. After a brief silence, he tells her that she can stay, but only until she finds a place. Relieved, Su Qi breathes a sigh of relief, thinking to herself that he's easier to handle when she takes a softer approach rather than being confrontational. It's obvious that the drama is just getting started. Want us to continue? Comment Su Qi below. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, ciao.